Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I get a chance to speak, interview thought leaders, engineering, technology leaders, asking them a bit about their story, how they got into their careers, topics really relevant to our STEM listeners and that all-important career advice at the end. So I'm really pleased to have Philipa Rodney with me today. So Philipa is a tech leader, specializes with startups, and is someone who has quite an inspirational story and has grown through the ranks. And so without further ado, I'm going to welcome you to the show. So Philipa, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
It is great to have you on here. And let's jump straight into it. Tell us a bit about your story.
My story is pretty long. I'd say it's not very typical of the way someone would traditionally move into tech. And I think that really describes my character, my determination, also serves as a bit of an inspiration to others. So I started off doing a master's in electrical and electronic engineering. And during that time, and probably still now, I was obsessed with robotics. I loved all the modules that we had. And the highlight of my time was the very few coding modules that we had every year. And from doing 4 years of that, I decided I was going to move into software engineering. So having the background of hardware and then wanting to be able to build prototypes and then actually program the logic for these tools, I thought, okay, let's move into software engineering. And so I started my career as a graduate software engineer in the Ministry of Defense. And then I worked in the defense industry for a couple of years. And I think during that time, it was really clear to me after maybe 3 or 4 years that my passions just lie in people leadership. I always realized that I could bring people together. I could lead people through like the trenches, the hardest times, the tightest deadlines, and still be able to build that bridge between maybe technical and non-technical folks, so to speak. And yeah, so I realized that was a passion of mine, that was a skill of mine. So I started to look at how I could do that elsewhere. After looking into that, I kicked off my leadership career. For the last couple of years, I've been an engineering leader at various startups, varying in size as well. They've either been fintech or subscription services, and they've been either very small, where I've been like the first EM, for example, or they've been varied and it's been quite large. But even so, for a startup, it's been quite small. There's been a lot of process improvement, which is also a skill of mine. I love going somewhere new and looking at what's on fire, what's going to be on fire in the future, how can we improve the culture and how can we shape the teams to grow and thrive as the company changes and develops as well. So that's a bit of my background.
Yeah, and well, it's clear to see, whether our STEM grads are listening or watching this, that your passion for technology and people, is evident almost in equal parts. So tell me a bit though about how you found, studying robotics, going through university, and getting your footstep into your first sort of technology roles. Then, was there any hurdles you had to overcome, or anything that you found tougher?
I found it really tough landing my first role. I think, especially as I was a lot younger, I wasn't very confident or sure because I knew I'd be competing with people who actually had a lot more experience and had potentially software engineering degrees or computer science degrees. And here's me chilling with my master's in electrical and electronic engineering, and that would worry me a little bit because there's only so much knowledge I had. However, something I've learned over the years is just showing my passion. So for the job that I landed, my interview was highly technical. I could not do that much in the interview stage, but I was able to share my ideas, do lots of whiteboarding and diagrams and get across how I would solve a problem. And that's something that really helps me land that role because they could see the potential of just how I think out loud and how I would address something or how I would ask for help. So I would say the interview process was pretty stressful, pretty nerve-wracking. But as I started to understand the value that I could bring to the teams or just understanding what was missing from my knowledge and how I could get it, then it increased my chances in the interview process.
Yeah, and I think that's such good advice that, whether you're going for an interview and you might not tick all the boxes from an academic point of view, but getting an opportunity to show how your thought process is, how you work, because clearly, studying robotics will be as complicated, if not more, than maybe some of the other software languages. So it's about trying to get that footstep in into business. And you mentioned earlier, Rich, again, I loved when you said it about people and culture, and that you've got that ability to be able to connect technical and non-technical teams. Can you tell me a bit more about what have been the best cultures, or what do you believe is the best culture that people should be able to work in?
I feel like I could fill up the whole podcast episode with all of my ideas. But yeah, what is the most important? I'd say being authentic, being able to have an environment where people can bring their best selves to work. Work is really stressful already. The tech sector is very challenging, lots of tight deadlines, lots of innovation. So it can be very high tempo, fast paced. And so you want to be able to know that you're doing the best at work, or know that you're giving the opportunity to do your best. So for me, growth is extremely important. You should be able to go to work and know that you can make mistakes, you can learn from them very quickly, and you'll have support from your leader and your peers that actually help you grow in your role. And so, yeah, growth is very important. Being able to be yourself at work is very important. And being able to help others is extremely important, because if you help others, you can help yourself grow as well. So those are some of the key things I look for, whether it's looking at a new role or looking at what other people are interested in. Just understanding the strengths of the culture and the business and how it will help that person succeed is very important to me.
Yeah, and again, I couldn't agree with you more, and especially about the authentic bits. You know, I truly believe now, being in the industry for as long as I have, where, you know, 10, 20 years ago, teams were sort of built very much on similar profiles, and you know,
Yeah.
everyone looked the same, acted the same, you know, or felt they needed to act the same. And what's been lovely, especially over the last 5 years, if not 10, is actually the teams and the companies that embrace not just diversity, but people being their authentic selves, and being able to bring that to the table. They're the teams that excel and probably develop faster than you know, the traditional teams that all look the same and feel the same.
Yeah, definitely. Because they have those ideas. If you've got a diverse group of people, then you'll have a wider range of ideas to bring to the table, which means your product is going to be more innovative, which is just better for everyone. When you just have teams where everyone looks the same, you're just going to have the same ideas over and over again. And that's literally the opposite of innovation. So that's not what we want tech to be like. So that's something that's really important.
Yeah, yeah. And leaning back on what you also mentioned about, you know, because obviously when you got into the industry originally, you were very junior, and so it was quite nerve-wracking and difficult. Thinking about today's teams and how they're made up, do you see and do you embrace that teams should have that multi-levels of very junior people all the way through to senior mentors?
Yes, it's very important. But even before you get to that stage, as a business, you need to be ready to take on those levels of seniority. I have seen in many cases and made those mistakes as well, where you think you're ready to hire a junior because it's a great idea. You want someone to join and learn, but you're not set up to set them up for success. You might not have, you know, a good backlog of tasks for them, or you might not have balanced the workload of the senior engineers. Therefore, they're not actually going to have a great mentor onboarding body. And then what you've done instead is potentially ruin the initial idea of what tech is like, because it's their first role. And so before we even start thinking about having those different seniority levels as a company or as an engineering team, you have to think, are we ready? Can we set them up for success? And if not, let's get prepared. Let's sort ourselves out first before we bring them in. But no, I love seeing teams that have lots of different seniority levels. I love seeing that balance, and I love seeing people grow internally as well, instead of always hiring more senior people externally. I love seeing people grow into those roles and then potentially backfilling new people into the less senior roles. That's nice.
Yeah, yeah. And again, you're so right. If companies actually invest that time to set up for success and invest, you know, with the proper onboarding, mentorship, and even, like you said, ensuring there's enough work at that level to be able to keep a junior person engaged. Because everyone wants to add value and be hands-on, don't they? So no one wants to be a passenger for the first 2 years. And a really interesting question that, you know, knowing that your background, you started with the Ministry of Defence, you've then worked with, you know, huge companies, BAE Systems and others, and then you got into fintech and startups.
Mhm.
What do you think are the key differences between the culture of a fully established business like the Ministry of Defence, for example, versus the true tech startup? Is there anything that people should be aware of the cultures?
The pace is so much more intense at startups. I feel that's a very obvious thing, but you don't realize until you get there. When you're in a larger, more established organization, in a lot of cases, the pace will feel slower, especially if you've come from startup and then moved into corporate. There's a lot more hurdles, a lot more layers and levels to get through for decision making. But on the flip side, they're probably a lot better at documentation and onboarding and progression because they are larger and more established, versus when you do tend to go to startups, especially if you're an early employee like I usually am, there's probably nothing ready for you. There probably isn't onboarding, you probably won't have a buddy, and you'll really be flying solo. And I think it does take a different type of person to thrive in those environments. It doesn't mean that it's not for everyone, but you just have to be honest and understand it's not going to be perfect at the start. And it traditionally will take a couple of years for the first trial of some processes to come around. And so it just depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a bit more stability and you want those processes already in place for you, not a lot of startups, especially if they're in that early stage, will be ready for that, versus if you go to a corporate place that's been around for a lot longer. So I'd say that's one of the biggest things about culture.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you totally, and you're right. Hopefully most people understand that as a key difference, but you can't overemphasize it either, because it's until you're actually in a true startup where, from my experience, you also have to be willing to do anything, roll your sleeves up. So that any job is no big or too small, from probably clearing down your desks and emptying the bins, all the way through to pitching with the founder to their investors.
Everyone's got a different hat. And like I say, it's really important to understand what you're looking for, because if you do want to grow and you do want to learn from people, it depends. Do you want to go to a startup where you might be not learning so much because you're doing everything, versus maybe in a corporate environment, you'll have that focused, dedicated mentor or line manager that has a lot of time for you. But yeah, it takes time to just scope it out and see what's best for you.
Yeah,
I recommend both. I would definitely recommend working in both environments just so you can see the difference. And then there'll be certain aspects that you may have taken for granted before that you really appreciate when you go to somewhere bigger or smaller.
yeah, agreed. Well, look, time is flying by. So now we move on to our career advice for our many young people who are listening to the podcast. So what one or two tips do you have as a young person who's trying to get into technology for how they could stand out or get that foot in the door?
How to stand out. It's going to sound corny, but be yourself. It's really inspirational to see people who are very comfortable in their own skin, very honest and passionate about what they know and what they don't know, and just being really willing to communicate and share like your achievements. How are you trying to grow? I wouldn't say pigeonhole yourself into one route. Be very open to trying many different things, and that's something that really got me where I am today, is being able to just say, I'll do that job. I was a software engineer, but I also said I'll pick up that data science role. I'll work in legal for a year. Like, I did whatever it took so I could figure out what I enjoyed and what I didn't. And just having that diversity of thought and being able to be flexible is something that will make you stand out. So be yourself and be flexible would be tip one. What was the other question you had? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's the same one. It's just a couple of pieces of advice to stand out, to get that foot in the door, and being yourself. Absolutely, I think you can't overemphasize that either. Is there one other top tip from when you've been interviewing young people that that's resonated with you when you've interviewed someone that you think, yeah, you've stood out to me?
You can see the difference in candidates that have seeked role models. So people that join mentorship programs, or people that may have just gone to a networking event and spoken to people either in the roles that they're trying to get into, or people that have done those roles before, because you can't put a price on that extra knowledge and just networking and information. that you get from just seeking a role model. So I'd say number 2, to stand out and get your foot in the door. Just network. It can be as simple as sending someone a LinkedIn message. We're very busy people, but we love to give back, and the people that will respond to you are the right people that you want to collaborate with anyway, because they want to give back and help you get to where they've been before. So I'd say that's really important to get into the industry as well.
Yeah, great. And thank you again. This is lovely because so much of what you've said really just does, it's really solid advice that resonates. And many of our listeners who are, who probably just graduated, if they've been to university, that is, in the last month or so in September, they've got to start getting themselves out there, especially if we're going into a slightly tougher economic time next year, to be able to network and be fearless, isn't it? It's the worst thing people can say is, sorry, I don't have time. The best thing they can do is open doors and give you those nuggets of information and mentorship.
Exactly. And some people just love to do that. Some people just love to connect people. And I'm learning to do that more and more. It doesn't cost a thing to just share a name somewhere, or share an email. So it's really helpful.
That's it. Well, Philipa, thank you. It's flown by. That's
it really has.
Yeah. And it always does.
You did warn me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Philipa, thank you so much for being a guest on our Future Tech podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, that's another episode of Future Tech, the podcast, as hopefully many of you know, is sponsored by the STEM Ambassadors charity, and is posted on our website, arrowsgroup.com/podcasts, and is shared with the many colleges and universities associated with the STEM Ambassadors. So this is another show. Thanks, everyone. And next time.